Racist cop beats black woman. Her U.S. Marshal husband strikes back. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on a notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. Cassandra Johnson lived an ordinary life in a busy city, like so many others. But that day, everything changed. It was a day that would leave her marked forever. Cassandra, a black woman, had faced the subtle and not-so-subtle racism that exists in many places, but she always tried to keep her head down, stay out of trouble, and simply live her life. Her husband, Darren Johnson, was a U.S. Marshal, and with his demanding job, they had learned to balance their busy lives. Yet no matter how hard they worked, Cassandra couldn't escape the reality of the world they lived in. That fateful afternoon, Cassandra was walking to her car after finishing her shift at the local hospital. It was an unusually warm day, and she was looking forward to getting home. But as she approached her car, she noticed a patrol car slowly pulling up. Officer Luke Harris, a white male police officer, stepped out of the vehicle and made his way toward her. Cassandra had no idea why he was approaching her. She hadn't done anything wrong. But when he began to ask her questions that didn't make sense and were clearly unnecessary, she felt a sudden unease. As the officer continued to speak to her, Cassandra's heart began to race. She tried to stay calm, knowing that any misstep could escalate the situation. But the officer's tone shifted. His questions became more demanding. She couldn't understand why this was happening. Cassandra had been in situations before where she felt the sting of discrimination, but nothing had ever felt quite like this. She tried to remain composed, even as the officer's questions grew more aggressive. But it didn't take long for the situation to take a turn. Cassandra was no longer speaking to a man trying to do his job. She was facing someone who was not interested in listening to her side of the story. At this point, she felt vulnerable. She didn't want to make a scene, but her mind raced with the realization that this could end very differently from what she had hoped. As Cassandra stood there, helpless and confused, Officer Harris didn't seem to care. He continued to press, his authority seemingly unchallenged. She had no idea what to do. That's when Cassandra thought of Darren, her husband. He had taught her how to handle difficult situations like this, but nothing could have prepared her for this moment. Cassandra's fear began to grow, and for the first time in a long time, she felt powerless in a way that shook her to the core. As Officer Harris continued to demand answers, Cassandra's heart raced. She was unsure of how to react, feeling a sense of dread creeping over her. She had been in uncomfortable situations before, but this felt different. The officer's questions grew more pointed, and his body language became increasingly aggressive. Cassandra, trying her best to stay calm, kept her voice steady, explaining that she was simply trying to leave work. She kept thinking about Darren. What would he say? How would he want her to handle this? She didn't want to escalate the situation, but the officer's tone made her feel as if he had already made up his mind about her. He wasn't listening. He wasn't seeing her as a person. He was seeing something else, something that made her feel small, as though her words didn't matter. Cassandra knew this wasn't right, but there seemed to be no way out. Her hands began to shake, and the world around her seemed to narrow. She could hear the officer's voice, but it felt distant, like she was underwater, just trying to stay afloat. She couldn't help but feel as if the situation was spiraling out of her control. She kept thinking, why me? Why now? But deep down, she knew the answer because of who she was, the color of her skin. It was an exhausting realization. Just as she was beginning to fear the worst, she saw Darren's face in her mind. He had always told her to stay strong, to speak up for herself, but this was different. He wasn't there. She could only rely on herself. Just as Officer Harris was about to say something else, Cassandra quickly tried to step back toward her car, hoping to end the conversation. But the officer took a step toward her, blocking her path. He seemed intent on pushing the issue further. This was no longer a simple interaction. This was something more, something that made Cassandra feel trapped. Meanwhile, at the Johnson household, Darren was getting ready for his shift. He was a U.S. Marshal, a man who had seen it all. But today was different. He could feel in the air an unease that lingered. He checked his phone, noticing a text from Cassandra. His heart skipped a beat. It was just a brief message. "Something's wrong, call me." Darren knew his wife well enough to understand when something wasn't right. He immediately dialed her number, but it went straight to voicemail. Panic set in. He tried calling again, but still no answer. His instincts kicked in. He knew he had to get to her. The unease he had felt earlier now seemed like a warning. Without wasting any time, Darren grabbed his gear and left the house. As he drove to where Cassandra was, his mind raced. He tried to calm himself, to reason through the situation, but his thoughts were interrupted by a sudden surge of anxiety. He couldn't shake the feeling that something had gone terribly wrong. Meanwhile, Cassandra's mind was racing as well. She had no idea how things had gotten so out of hand so quickly. She just wanted to get away, to put the whole incident behind her. But the officer wasn't letting her go. He stood there, blocking her path, as if daring her to make a move. Cassandra tried to keep her cool. She couldn't afford to panic. She had been taught to think clearly in stressful situations, but this was different. She felt cornered. She couldn't get away. She was trapped. The longer she stood there, the more the weight of the situation pressed down on her. She felt the air around her growing thicker, her breath shorter. Every moment seemed to stretch out longer than the last. As Cassandra stood frozen, the weight of the situation pressed down on her chest. Officer Harris didn't budge, his posture still firm, blocking her escape. She was aware of every movement he made, her body tense with anticipation. She knew that this wasn't just a random encounter anymore. This had turned into something much more serious, and she had to think fast. Cassandra's mind raced, trying to recall everything Darren had taught her about handling moments like these. Stay calm. Stay composed. Speak slowly. But even as she tried to remind herself of these things, the officer's intimidating presence felt suffocating. She could feel her heartbeat quicken, the pressure building as the officer's eyes narrowed. He was waiting for her to make a move, and in that moment, it felt like all eyes were on her. Cassandra's breath came in short bursts. She glanced around, hoping for someone to step in, but the street was empty. There was no one to help. She was alone in this. All she could do was stay calm, stay silent, and pray that this wouldn't escalate further. Just as her thoughts started to spiral, her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was Darren. She quickly answered, her voice barely a whisper. "Darren, something's wrong. The officer won't let me go." The words felt like a confession, a cry for help she didn't want to have to make. Darren's voice came through, calm but filled with concern. "Stay where you are. I'm on my way." He hung up, and Cassandra's hands shook as she put the phone back in her pocket. She had no idea how long it would take for him to arrive, but she knew that her only hope right now was to hold her ground. Officer Harris seemed to sense the shift in her demeanor. His expression softened slightly, but his stance remained firm. He took a step forward, and Cassandra instinctively took a step back. The distance between them was closing, and with it, the fear she had been trying to suppress was rising. She had been in situations before where she had felt powerless, but this felt different. This was something deeper, something that went beyond just a personal encounter. This was about a system, a history of injustice, and the weight of being treated differently because of the color of her skin. Cassandra tried to gather herself. She couldn't let him see how scared she was. She needed to stay strong. She thought of Darren. He was always her protector, her rock. But right now it was just her. She had to rely on herself. "I haven't done anything wrong," Cassandra said, her voice shaking but steady. "Officer." Harris didn't respond immediately. Instead, he seemed to look at her as if weighing her words. It was as though he was trying to decide whether or not to let her go. But the decision wasn't his to make. She wasn't the one in the wrong here. As the silence stretched between them, Cassandra began to feel a sense of quiet determination. She wasn't going to let this moment define her. She wouldn't be silenced. At that moment, the sound of an approaching car broke the tension. Cassandra's heart skipped a beat as she recognized the familiar vehicle. It was Darren's. He had arrived. Cassandra's relief was palpable, but she didn't let her guard down just yet. The officer hadn't moved, and she knew she had to stay alert. Darren's car pulled to a stop a few feet away. He stepped out, his eyes immediately scanning the scene. He locked eyes with Cassandra first, giving her a reassuring nod. Then he turned to Officer Harris, his presence immediately shifting the atmosphere. The tension in the air was thick, and Cassandra could feel the energy in the street change as Darren approached. He was here now, and Cassandra's sense of fear was replaced with the smallest sense of hope. She wasn't alone anymore. As Darren stepped out of the car, the tension in the air thickened. His eyes immediately locked onto Cassandra's, and despite the situation, she could feel the warmth of his gaze. He wasn't just her husband. He was her protector, the person who had always stood by her side. But today, things were different. Darren was a U.S. Marshal, someone used in navigating dangerous situations, but even he could feel the weight of this moment. He didn't hesitate as he walked toward Officer Harris, his presence commanding and purposeful. Officer Harris, who had been blocking Cassandra's path, straightened up slightly as Darren approached. There was no mistaking the shift in energy. Cassandra could feel the tension begin to crack. She stayed still, watching as Darren made his way closer to the officer. She knew Darren would handle things the right way, but a part of her couldn't help but worry. What would happen next? Would Officer Harris escalate the situation further? Darren's voice cut through the air, calm but firm. "What's going on here, officer?" he asked, his eyes never leaving Harris's face. Officer Harris hesitated for a moment before responding. "She was obstructing my investigation." Darren raised an eyebrow. "Obstructing? I don't see any reason why she should be detained, especially not like this." He looked back at Cassandra, giving her another reassuring nod. "You're free to go, Cassandra," he said, his voice steady, yet carrying an undercurrent of authority. Officer Harris's gaze shifted briefly from Darren to Cassandra, then back to Darren. The officer seemed to weigh his options, but the power dynamic had shifted. Darren wasn't just any ordinary citizen. He was a U.S. Marshal, someone with the authority to challenge this officer's actions. The silence between the two men stretched for a moment, and Cassandra could feel her heart rate begin to steady. She was no longer alone in this confrontation. Darren was there, standing up for her, and that gave her the strength she needed. "This is harassment," Darren continued, his voice now carrying more weight. "You've got no right to treat her this way. I suggest you step aside." Officer Harris took a deep breath, his face showing the slightest signs of frustration. But there was nothing he could say or do to challenge Darren's authority in that moment. With a final glance at Cassandra, he took a step back, reluctantly clearing the path. Darren turned to Cassandra, his expression softening. "It's okay. Let's go home." Cassandra didn't need to be told twice. She stepped forward, the weight that had been pressing on her chest lifting with every step. The relief was overwhelming, but she also knew this was far from over. As they walked toward the car, Cassandra glanced back at Officer Harris, who remained standing where he had been, his expression unreadable. But it didn't matter now. The damage had been done, and the scars would remain long after they drove away. When they got into the car, Cassandra let out a deep breath she didn't realize she had been holding. She turned to Darren, her eyes filled with gratitude and a touch of exhaustion. "Thank you," she whispered. Darren reached over and took her hand in his, squeezing it gently. "You don't have to thank me. I'm just glad you're safe." But as they drove away, Cassandra couldn't help but think about what had just happened. The fear, the uncertainty, the helplessness, she couldn't shake those feelings. They would stay with her and with Darren for a long time. This wasn't just one isolated incident. This was a reality they both knew all too well. And as they continued driving, Cassandra silently vowed to never let this kind of injustice go unchallenged again. As they drove away, Cassandra stared out of the passenger window, her thoughts still racing. The streetlights flickered past, but they couldn't light up the dark corner in her mind where the events of the evening kept replaying. She could still hear Officer Harris's voice, cold and dismissive, and she could feel the weight of his eyes on her. It wasn't just the confrontation with the officer that bothered her. It was the reminder of something deeper, something that had always lingered beneath the surface. Cassandra's hand instinctively reached for Darren's, and he squeezed it gently, offering her a quiet reassurance. He knew she needed space, but he also understood that she was processing what had happened. "You okay?" he asked softly, his voice calm, yet laced with concern. Cassandra didn't answer right away. Instead, she just took a deep breath and let it out slowly, as if trying to release some of the tension that had built up in her chest. The fear had faded, but the anger was still there, simmering beneath the surface. "I don't know," she finally replied. I'm okay, but I don't know how to feel. She trailed off, not sure how to put into words the whirlwind of emotions that had overtaken her. Darren glanced over at her briefly before focusing back on the road. "You don't have to have all the answers right now," he said. "You don't have to figure everything out. Just take it one step at a time." His words were comforting, but Cassandra couldn't help but feel like something had shifted. The safety and security she had once taken for granted had been fractured, and the world outside the car seemed less predictable, less safe. "It's just why? Why do people think they can treat you like that? Just because of the way you look?" she asked, the frustration clear in her voice. Darren sighed, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. He had seen this before, the toll that the constant weight of prejudice could take on someone's soul. "I don't have an answer for that," he said quietly. "I wish I did. But I know this, we have to keep fighting for what's right, not just for us, but for everyone who's been treated the same way. It's not fair, and it shouldn't be like this." Cassandra nodded slowly, but she still felt the sting of helplessness. She thought about how easily things could have gone worse, how many others had faced far worse situations without anyone to stand up for them. The anger bubbled up again. "I'm tired of it, Darren. I'm tired of feeling like I have to be afraid every time I leave the house. Like I'm just a target." Darren's jaw tightened, but he didn't say anything right away. He understood. He had been in the fight for justice long enough to know how draining it could be, how exhausting it could be to keep pushing forward when it felt like the world was against you. "I get it," he finally said, "but we keep going. We keep pushing because that's the only way to change things. And I'll be right here with you every step of the way." His words gave her a bit of comfort, but Cassandra couldn't shake the feeling that things were never going to be the same. As they pulled into their driveway, the house loomed in front of them, a symbol of normalcy in a world that now felt anything but normal. Darren put the car in park, and the two of them sat there for a moment in silence. The sound of the engine ticking as it cooled down was the only noise in the car. Finally, Darren turned to her, his face softening. "We'll get through this, Cass," he said. "Together." Cassandra smiled faintly, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I know," she whispered. But deep down, she wondered just how much longer she could keep fighting. How much longer they could keep fighting. The weight of the world seemed a little heavier now, and the future, once so certain, felt uncertain. But for now, all she could do was take it one day at a time. The following days were a blur for Cassandra. The encounter with Officer Harris had shaken her, and though she tried to return to her routine, she couldn't escape the haunting memories of that moment. Every time she left the house, she couldn't shake the feeling that something might happen again. It wasn't just the officer's behavior that bothered her. It was the reminder that the world didn't always see her the way she saw herself. It was a constant, nagging feeling of being judged before she even had a chance to speak, to prove herself. Darren noticed the change in her immediately. She was quieter, more withdrawn. She still went to work, still took care of the things she needed to, but there was a heaviness about her that he couldn't ignore. He knew that the events of that day had affected her more than she was willing to admit. One evening, after dinner, as they sat together in the living room, Darren couldn't stand the silence anymore. "Cass," he said gently, "we need to talk. I can see you're carrying something, and it's not good to keep it inside." Cassandra looked at him, her eyes tired but soft. She wanted to say that she was fine, that it was just another thing to get over. But the truth was, she didn't feel fine. She didn't feel safe. "I don't know what to do, Darren," she admitted, her voice shaky. "I keep thinking about that day. I keep thinking about how powerless I felt. It's like no matter how hard I try, No matter how many times I tell myself it's okay, I just keep seeing that moment over and over again in my head. Darren reached out, taking her hand in his. I know it's tough, and I know it's hard to let go of something like that. But you don't have to face it alone. We'll get through it together, okay? Cassandra nodded slowly, trying to take comfort in his words. But deep down, she knew the fight for justice wasn't something that could be easily erased. It wasn't something that would go away just because she wanted it to. The truth was she was afraid. Afraid of what might happen next. Afraid that one day, the situation would escalate again, and no one would be there to stop it. The thought made her feel small, powerless. I don't know if I can keep doing this, she whispered, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can keep living in a world where I feel like this, where every interaction feels like a potential threat. Darren's heart ached for her. He had always known the weight she carried, but he had never seen it so clearly before. He had never seen her so vulnerable. Cass, he said, his voice steady. I understand more than you know, but we can't give up. We can't let fear win. Cassandra looked at him, her eyes filled with tears that she hadn't let fall before. What if we can't change anything? What if nothing ever gets better? She asked, her voice breaking. Darren pulled her into a tight embrace, not knowing what to say, but wanting her to feel his strength, his unwavering support. We can change things, he said softly. It won't happen overnight, but we can make a difference, one step at a time. And I'll be right here with you, every step of the way. As they sat together in the quiet of the evening, Cassandra clung to Darren, feeling both the weight of the world and the comfort of his embrace. She knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, that the fear and uncertainty would still be there, lingering in the background. But for the first time since the incident, she felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could make a difference. Maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to move forward. Together. The following weeks felt like a constant balancing act for Cassandra and Darren. They had begun to adjust to the weight of the recent events, but it wasn't easy. Cassandra still found herself second-guessing every interaction, every glance, wondering if people saw her the way Officer Harris had seen her. The doubt, the fear, it lingered, making the world feel a little more dangerous than it had before. Darren did his best to keep the peace, offering her a sense of normalcy when she needed it, but he could see how hard it was for her. He could see the moments when she was lost in thought, the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes anymore. She was trying, but the scars of that encounter weren't fading as quickly as they had hoped. One evening, as the two of them sat in the living room, Cassandra stared at the TV without really seeing it. The silence stretched between them, heavy and thick. Darren looked over at her, sensing the change in her mood. "Cass, talk to me," he said softly, his voice warm but filled with concern. She hesitated, her gaze flickering over to him before she finally spoke. "I feel like I'm walking on eggshells," she said, her voice tinged with frustration. "Every day, I'm just waiting for something to go wrong. I don't know if I can keep living like this." Darren took a deep breath, his heart aching for her. He had always known that the weight of the world could sometimes feel unbearable, but he hadn't realized just how heavy it felt for her until now. "I get it," he said, his voice steady but soft. "I really do. But you can't let fear control you, Cassandra. You're stronger than that." She shook her head, her frustration turning into a quiet sadness. "I don't feel strong, Darren. I feel fragile. Like everything I do, every step I take, could lead to something worse." Darren's heart broke at the sight of her vulnerability. He reached over and took her hand in his, holding it firmly. "Listen to me," he said, his voice soft but full of conviction. "You've been through something terrible, but that doesn't define you. You're more than what happened that day, and you don't have to carry this burden alone. We'll figure this out together." Cassandra looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of doubt and hope. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that they could get past this. But there was a lingering fear inside her that kept her from fully letting go. But what if things don't change? What if the world doesn't change? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Darren squeezed her hand, his gaze never leaving hers. "We don't have control over everything, Cass. But we do have control over how we respond. And as long as I'm here, you don't have to face this alone. We'll keep fighting for what's right, for change. It won't be easy, but we'll do it together." His words sank in, and for the first time in a long while, Cassandra felt a flicker of hope. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was there. She wasn't sure what the future would hold or how long it would take for things to get better, but for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward. She leaned her head against Darren's shoulder, closing her eyes for a moment. The quiet comfort of his presence was enough to give her a sense of peace, even if it was only temporary. "I don't know what I would do without you," she whispered. Darren's hand gently stroked her hair as he whispered back, "You'll never have to find out, Cass. I'm always here." The warmth of his words wrapped around her like a protective shield. She didn't have all the answers, but in that moment, she knew that they would face whatever came next, together. The days following their conversation brought a subtle shift in Cassandra's demeanor. The weight of fear, while not gone, seemed lighter. She still had moments of doubt, but Darren's words had planted a seed of hope that she hadn't realized she needed. Each day felt like a quiet victory, small steps forward, even if they were barely noticeable. As the days turned into weeks, Cassandra found herself doing things she hadn't done in a while. She went out with friends, reconnected with people she had been distancing herself from, and even started walking through the neighborhood with a sense of confidence she hadn't felt before. It wasn't that the fear was gone, far from it, but each time she stepped outside, each time she faced the world again, it felt like a tiny reclaiming of what had been taken from her. Darren, too, seemed to notice the change. He had always known his wife to be strong, but there was a new light in her eyes, a glimmer of the woman he had married. One evening, after a particularly long day, they sat on the porch, the soft hum of the crickets in the background. Cassandra leaned back in her chair, looking out at the stars. "I used to think I had all the answers," she said, her voice calm but thoughtful. "But now, I'm starting to see that it's okay not to have everything figured out. It's okay to not have all the answers right now." Darren smiled, his hand reaching over to hers. "You don't have to have all the answers, Cass. You never did. It's about taking things one day at a time, and knowing that, no matter what, we have each other." Cassandra squeezed his hand, her heart swelling with gratitude. They had been through a lot together, and the road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to face it. "I'm still scared. Sometimes," she admitted, her voice softer now. "But I'm not alone, and I think that makes all the difference." Darren nodded, his gaze steady and reassuring. "You're never alone, Cass. You never will be." The world outside their small bubble was still unpredictable, still full of challenges, but Cassandra knew she didn't have to face it by herself. The uncertainty would always be there, but as long as she had Darren by her side, she knew they could navigate it together. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The next morning, as they woke up to the soft light of the early morning sun, Cassandra felt a sense of peace settle over her. The road ahead was uncertain, but she was learning how to walk it with courage. No matter what happened, she knew they would continue to fight for justice, for what was right. It wasn't just about one day or one incident. It was about the long-term journey. And for the first time in a long time, Cassandra felt ready to face whatever came next. She didn't have all the answers, but she had something far more important: hope. And with that, she was ready to take on the world again, one step at a time. As the months passed, Cassandra and Darren found a rhythm in their lives again. The constant fear that once loomed over them had begun to fade, though it never completely disappeared. Cassandra still had moments when she felt the weight of the world pressing down on her. But with each passing day, she grew stronger. She had learned to navigate the delicate balance between acknowledging her fear and finding the courage to move forward. Darren had been her constant anchor, always there to offer support when she needed it most. They continued to fight together, not just for their own peace of mind, but for a future where justice and equality were not just ideals but realities. One afternoon, Cassandra found herself sitting in a small coffee shop, a place she had visited many times before, but today it felt different. It was as though the world outside had changed, or perhaps it was her own perception of it. She looked around at the people coming and going, each one living their own life, each one with their own story. She had once felt invisible in this crowd, a part of the system that often overlooked people like her. But today, she didn't feel that way. Today, she felt like she belonged. She realized that while she couldn't change the world overnight, she could change how she faced it. With every small act of courage, with every moment of standing up for what was right, she was making a difference. It wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic showdowns. It was about the quiet moments of strength, the subtle defiance against a system that tried to keep her down. Darren joined her at the coffee shop, a smile on his face as he slid into the seat across from her. They shared a quiet, understanding glance. They didn't need words to communicate anymore. They had both grown in ways that were hard to put into words. Cassandra had learned that it wasn't about perfection or always having the right answer. It was about resilience. It was about finding the strength to rise, even when it felt impossible. "You good?" Darren asked, his voice gentle as he reached across the table to take her hand. Cassandra smiled, a small but genuine smile. "Yeah, I'm good," she replied, her voice filled with quiet confidence. It was the first time in a long while that she felt at peace with herself. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, just enjoying the simple act of being together. In that moment, they both understood that they had come a long way, and though the road ahead was still uncertain, they were ready to face it side by side. As they left the coffee shop, the world outside seemed a little brighter, a little more welcoming. Cassandra wasn't naive. She knew that challenges would come, that the fight for justice was ongoing. But she also knew that she wasn't alone. With Darren by her side, she felt capable of taking on whatever came their way. And so, they walked forward, hand in hand, ready for whatever the future held, knowing that as long as they faced it together, they would find the strength to overcome it. The journey was far from over, but Cassandra had finally found the courage to embrace it. The future, uncertain as it was, felt a little less daunting now. With hope, love, and a deep sense of purpose, Cassandra and Darren continued their journey, one step at a time, together.